Abraham's early life in Ur and the divine call. Abraham was born around 2000 BCE in Ur, an ancient city of Mesopotamia located in what is now southern Iraq. Ur was a major Sumerian urban center with advanced infrastructure and polytheistic religion. At this time, Abraham, then named Abram, lived in a society that worshipped multiple gods. Despite his ancestry tracing back to Noah, his family, including his father Terah, practiced idolatry according to the biblical record in Joshua 24:2. Abram's life changed drastically when, according to Genesis 12, the God of Noah, Yahweh, spoke to him directly. God's command was abrupt and radical. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. In return, God promised to make Abram into a great nation, bless him, and make his name great. God also declared that all the peoples on earth would be blessed through him. This foundational covenant would later define not only Abram's destiny, but the course of biblical history. Migration from Ur to Haran. Obeying the divine call, Abram departed from Ur with his father Terah, his wife Sarai, and his nephew Lot. The group followed a common trade route northwest up the Euphrates River to the city of Haran, modern-day southeastern Turkey. Haran, like Ur, was a pagan city, and they remained there for several years. It was only after Terah's death that Abram, now 75 years old, resumed the journey southward as instructed by God, arrival in Canaan, Shechem, and Bethel. Abram entered Canaan, stopping first at Shechem, a Canaanite city nestled between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. There, God appeared to Abram and reiterated his promise. To your descendants I will give this land. In response, Abram built an altar to the Lord at Shechem, an act of worship that marked the land spiritually. From Shechem, Abram moved to Bethel, pitched his tent between Bethel and Ai, and built a second altar. But shortly after, a severe famine drove him to leave Canaan and travel south to Egypt. Sojourn in Egypt and deception. In Egypt, fearing for his life due to Sarai's beauty, Abram told Pharaoh's officials that Sarai was his sister. This deception led Pharaoh to take Sarai into his palace. But divine intervention came quickly. Plagues struck Pharaoh's household, prompting Pharaoh to return Sarai and expel Abram and his entourage from Egypt. This marked the beginning of a recurring pattern in Abram's life. Lapses in judgment followed by divine rescue. Separation from Lot and settlement in Mamre. Back in Canaan, tensions arose between Abram's and Lot's growing herdsmen. To avoid conflict, Abram proposed they separate. Lot chose the fertile Jordan Valley, settling near Sodom, while Abram stayed in the hill country of Hebron at Mamre. Here, Abram built a third altar to God and received a reaffirmation of the promise that his descendants would inherit the land. War, rescue, and a mysterious priest king. Lot's capture and Abram's military campaign. Not long after Lot settled in the Jordan Valley, a conflict broke out. 4 Mesopotamian kings, led by Chedorlaomer, invaded the region and sacked the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot and his family were taken captive, along with their possessions. When Abram heard of Lot's capture, he immediately mobilized 318 trained men born in his household. Despite the small size of his force, Abram pursued the invaders northward, launching a surprise attack at night near Dan, and continuing the chase as far as Hagar, north of Damascus. Abram's mission was successful. He recovered Lot, the captives, and their goods. This military campaign was both a demonstration of Abram's loyalty to family and a notable act of leadership and courage. It also marked him as a rising figure of influence in the land. Encounter with Melchizedek. Upon returning from battle, Abram was met by the king of Sodom and another figure, Melchizedek, king of Salem, later Jerusalem, and priest of God Most High. Melchizedek brought out bread and wine and blessed Abram with these words, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." Abram responded by giving Melchizedek a tenth of all the recovered goods. Melchizedek's sudden appearance, dual role as king and priest, and monotheistic faith set him apart from the other Canaanite rulers. His encounter with Abram foreshadowed deeper biblical themes, particularly the priesthood and kingship of the Messiah. The New Testament in the book of Hebrews later identifies Melchizedek as a typological precursor to Jesus Christ, who is both eternal high priest and divine king. God's covenant and the vision of the future. After the victory, Abram returned to his camp at Mamre, but his heart was unsettled. Despite wealth and growing influence, he had no heir. God addressed Abram's concern directly. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram replied, questioning what good God's reward was if he remained childless. God then led Abram outside and told him to look at the stars. "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, one of the Bible's most significant theological moments. Then God made a formal covenant with Abram. Animals were cut in half, a ritual of covenant making, and God alone passed between the pieces, signifying that the fulfillment of the promise depended solely on him. In a deep sleep, Abram received a prophetic vision. His descendants would be strangers in a foreign land, enslaved for 400 years, but God would deliver them and bring them back to Canaan. Finally, God promised to give Abram's descendants the land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. Hagar, Ishmael, and the struggle for legacy. Years passed, and Sarai remained barren. She proposed a surrogate solution. Abram would have a child with her Egyptian maid, Hagar. Abram agreed. Hagar conceived and gave birth to Ishmael, but tension flared between Sarai and Hagar, and the situation became volatile. God, however, reaffirmed his original plan. Ishmael would be blessed and become a great nation, but the promised heir would come through Sarai. At this pivotal moment, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, father of many, and Sarai's name to Sarah, princess. Circumcision was instituted as a sign of the covenant. Divine visitors, Sodom's judgment, and the birth of Isaac, God's visit at Mamre. Abraham was camped near the oaks of Mamre when 3 men approached. These were no ordinary visitors. 2 were angels, and 1 was the Lord himself in human form. Abraham instinctively recognized their divine nature, bowed low, and hastily prepared a lavish meal for them. During the meal, God reiterated the promise. Sarah would bear a son within a year. Sarah, overhearing this from inside the tent, laughed inwardly at the idea, since she was 90 years old and had been barren her entire life. God responded by confronting her laughter and posing a rhetorical question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? This moment underscored the supernatural nature of the promise. A child born not of natural possibility, but divine intervention. Abraham intercedes for Sodom. After the meal, the 2 angels set out towards Sodom, but God lingered with Abraham. He revealed his plan to investigate the city's wickedness and, if confirmed, bring judgment upon it. Abraham, deeply concerned for his nephew Lot, began to intercede. In a bold display of faith and compassion, Abraham negotiated with God, asking if he would spare the city for the sake of 50 righteous people, then 45, then 40, continuing down to 10. God agreed. If 10 righteous people were found, he would spare the city. Destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The angels arrived in Sodom and were met by Lot at the city gate. He insisted they stay at his house, sensing the danger of the city's nightlife. That night, a violent mob surrounded Lot's home, demanding the visitors be handed over. In a tragic and disturbing moment, Lot offered his daughters instead, a decision that reflected the deep moral corruption of the culture. The angels intervened, striking the mob with blindness and warning Lot to gather his family and flee. At dawn, they led Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters out of the city, commanding them not to look back. As they reached safety, fire and brimstone rained from heaven, completely destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot's wife, looking back in defiance, was turned into a pillar of salt. This catastrophic judgment was both moral and physical. Archaeological investigations at sites like Tal el Hammam, possibly ancient Sodom, have uncovered sulfur balls embedded in charred ruins, matching the biblical description. Birth of Isaac. As promised, within the year, Sarah gave birth to a son, Isaac, whose name means "he laughs," a reference to Sarah's earlier skepticism and the joy his birth brought. This event was the climax of decades of waiting and wondering. Isaac's arrival confirmed God's faithfulness and the supernatural foundation of the Abrahamic covenant. But Abraham's journey of faith was far from over. The greatest test was still ahead, one that would place the life of Isaac itself on the altar. The sacrifice on Mount Moriah and Abraham's final years. God's command to sacrifice Isaac. Sometime after Isaac's birth, God issued a command that tested Abraham beyond any prior trial. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. The instruction was deliberate and direct. Isaac was not only Abraham's son, but also the embodiment of the divine promise. Sacrificing him seemed to contradict everything God had foretold. Nevertheless, Abraham obeyed. He traveled for 3 days to the land of Moriah, near what would later become Jerusalem. Isaac carried the wood for the offering, while Abraham held the fire and knife. When Isaac questioned where the lamb for the offering was, Abraham answered, God will provide. The altar and divine intervention. At the summit of Mount Moriah, Abraham built an altar and bound Isaac. As he raised the knife, an angel of the Lord called out, stopping him. A ram was caught in a nearby thicket, and God instructed Abraham to sacrifice the ram instead. This was more than a rescue. It was a moment of covenant reaffirmation. God declared, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed. This event was prophetic, prefiguring the future sacrifice of Jesus Christ in the same geographic region, an only son offered for the redemption of many. Death of Sarah and Abraham's burial in Hebron. Years later, Sarah died at the age of 127 in Hebron. Abraham purchased a burial site, the cave of Machpelah, from the Hittites, establishing the first recorded land possession in Canaan. This location, near modern-day Hebron, would become the family tomb of the patriarchs. Final years and death of Abraham. Abraham lived to the age of 175. Before his death, he ensured Isaac's future by sending his servant to find a wife for him from among his relatives in Mesopotamia. The servant returned with Rebekah, who became Isaac's wife. Abraham also had children with another wife, Keturah, but he gave all his inheritance to Isaac and sent the other sons eastward. Abraham was buried beside Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. His life, marked by obedience, trust, and covenant, became the foundation of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic faith traditions. He is remembered not only for the land he walked, but for the faith he walked it with.